I want to ask you something. How old were you when you realized that we live in a dysfunctional society? I must have been 7, 8 years old. I remember looking around and noticing that every single adult in my life acted like a zombie. Just a hollowed out shell of a human being. All of them. It was like they got up every morning and went to some terrible place where they became a little bit more like Squidward from SpongeBob with each passing day. Their ambition, their sense of humor, the smile on their face just got sucked right out, thrown on the floor. Boom! Gone forever. And as a kid, it's terrifying to think, you're next on the chopping block. I remember adults asking me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I honest to God had no answer. Like, sorry, I'm just waiting until I meet an adult who doesn't seem like they hate their lives, and I'm going to do whatever that guy does, right? Sadly, I never met such an adult. So, everything sucks. Everyone knows everything sucks, but for some strange reason, nothing changes. This is what life is now. It's okay if you don't like it. Hell, you're not supposed to. But we sure as hell got something to sell you to take the edge off. Whether it's just one more insert substance, a meditation app to help you align your chakras at home on your own time, or your favorite childhood movie, remastered in 4K in theaters now. And you only gotta sit through 24 and a half minutes of ads before the movie actually starts. That sounds like a great time, right? Right? It sounds like a terrible time. You know the truth. We live in hell. A boring dystopia. Something Mark Fisher called capitalist realism. Which is, funny enough, the very topic of this episode. Whoa, what do you know? But more on that in a minute. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the Murphy Monologues, a show where we talk about terrible things like the world we live in and how it makes us feel. Make sure to follow the show if you're a freak who's into that kind of thing. No hard feelings if not. And with that out of the way, I think we can hop on in to the episode. And we got a lot to cover, so just brace yourself, man. There's a lot here. So, Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher. This was a wonderful, wonderful book. I do encourage you to actually read it because I'll be real with you. I am not going to do this book justice. These are like my own little, musings, my own little, interpretations, and, I go all over the place. In fact, speaking of which, I actually don't even start on something Fisher talked about here. Like, we're going to actually start with the context of capitalism. Because I'm a nerd. I need context to really make sense of things. And so take it with a grain of salt. This is how I think about it. So it's probably wrong, but that's okay, At least I tell you, right? So I think we need to start by going back to Adam Smith's very important observation that capitalism, right, it essentially functions like this invisible hand, right, the invisible hand of the free market. And at the time, you could make a pretty compelling case that this is a really useful tool for coordinating strangers, right? Because otherwise, right, how do you coordinate strangers, right? People who don't know each other, who don't trust each other, maybe they don't have any shared beliefs, right? Maybe they don't even speak the same language. How do you get those people to coordinate, right? And that's where, capitalism and this fiction of money start coming into the picture, right? But there is a problem, as you may have heard, with capitalism, because sooner or later, people figure out how they can win capitalism. It's a game, and you can win it. And sometimes people do. So how you win capitalism is you start a business, and then you corner the market, right? You essentially build a monopoly, and then you can use all of your money to influence all the other things that are maybe in your way, right? You can lobby the government. You can pay people to just do whatever you want. You can pay people to vote certain ways, right? There's a lot you can do with money. It's a pretty powerful tool. And then inevitably you get something like, it's not so much an invisible hand of the free market, right? It's more like an invisible fist punching you in the face until you hand over your money, your hopes, and your dreams. And that is, my friend, that's what we call the Gilded Age, right? JP Morgan, Rockefeller, all these rich dudes had all the money in the world, and they basically the entire world just existed to serve these dudes. And they're not very nice people, right? The way they spent their money was not necessarily doing any good for anyone else. So it really does become like an invisible fist punching you in the face just again and again and again. It just doesn't stop, right? And sooner or later, people are like, man, I don't want to be punched in the face for the rest of my life. This is not a fun way to live. So somewhere along the way, the American politicians looked over at Russia and they were like, hey, if we don't give people a little bit of socialism, they're going to ask for a lot. And then we're going to get, bad things are going to happen to us, right? We're going to end up like the Tsar and his family. So the American politicians, they made a halfway deal, right? What we like to call here the New Deal. So even if you know how to win capitalism, the state intervenes to ensure that rich people don't hoard all of society's wealth, right? So we're still going to try to keep the invisible hand of the free market coordinating people without it becoming an invisible giant fist. Right? In theory, that's kind of what we were going for. And it was not perfect, right? There were problems with it. But let's acknowledge the truth here. This ushered in an age of prosperity never before or since experienced, right? The boomers, our grandparents, man, richest generation in history, luckiest people to have ever lived, right? Just insane social mobility. You could help. You got some of those boomers that, they got the lead stare. They're not very bright people. All they can really do is show up to some job. But it's like, there were no qualifications. You didn't even need to graduate high school and you can get a job and make a good living. What? You don't even need to go to high school? Are you kidding me? You go to college today and you can't even get a minimum wage job anymore. So it is unfathomable. Lucky boomers, man. That's all I got to say. And for a period of time, America was at least kind of a decent place to live, right? Kind. I'm not going to say it's perfect, right? I don't want to be like nostalgic about it, but we at least had an economy, right? We taxed people who were rich. We made sure that workers actually had rights. If there was some soul crushing job, you were at least compensated decently for it. If you showed up to a job every day for 40 years, you were able to retire. Those are good things, right? Those are the hallmarks of a functional civilization. But then somewhere around the 80s, we had a new idea, right? What if we went back to the face punching times, right? And this is essentially the core idea of the left's favorite boogeyman, neoliberalism. And there's not really a good definition here, so I'm just going to leave it as essentially, let's go back to the face punching times, right? So essentially what you get is widespread privatizations. So instead of things being run by the government, things are run by private businesses. And right, as you know, private businesses are in the business of making money. Yeah, a good one, man. You know your stuff. You know your capitalism. But we also had a whole bunch of, slashing of welfare states. So if you were not someone who was good at the economy, you kind of got left behind, right? Kind of like the Gilded Age, right? And if you look at, neoliberalism's, I think a good mascot for it, Ronald Reagan, right? He was the OG MAGA, right? And when Ronald Reagan said, "Let's make America great again," what era do you think he was referring to? Was he referring to the point in time when we stopped Nazi Germany from destroying the entire world? Was it the 60s and 70s prosperity and counterculture and this creative explosion that we had during that time? Or was it the face punching times? Right? And if you look at Reagan's policies, right, I think it's pretty clear. He wants to bring us back to the face punching times. So that's the world that we started going toward. And, right, that's the world we live in now. And we continue going in that direction, unfortunately. I think another big hallmark of neoliberalism is this shift, right, from what we can call Forwardism and post-Forwardism. And these are, again, these are now ideas straight from Fisher's Capitalist Realism. So Forwardism is a pretty popular term, and essentially you can think about it like, it's derived from Henry Ford. And this was when most of the economy essentially functioned as you had these factories and assembly lines, and it wasn't very fun work. It was actually pretty soul crushing. You end up wanting to lose yourself like Eminem, right? Because oh god, this is a terrible life. But it functions, right? It works. There's at least stability in it. And more importantly, it creates an atmosphere where it's possible for people to organize into labor unions, and that turned out to be a pretty good thing. But we kind of came away from that with neoliberalism, and we went into post-Fordism. So lifelong jobs turned into temporary jobs, pensions turned into 401ks, and factories turned into offices and service work. So we no longer live in the Fordism times, right? The efficiency, the assembly line. This is not really how the economy works. We live in a post-Fordist society. And that's, it seemed like a good development at the time because, again, Forwardism sucks. It sucks to work in an assembly line. It sucks to work in a factory, right? You look at where, these jobs didn't disappear, by the way. We just kind of offshored them, right? These are all the jobs that went to China and Vietnam and Mexico. And because those, a lot of those people will work for like 10 cents, right? And they'll be happy about it. You can't try hiring an American for 10 cents, right? See how that works out. But these jobs are soul crushing, man. A lot of these factories or sweatshops, they have to install suicide nets, right? You got suicide nets because the job is so miserable and the life circumstances are so terrible that people are like, man, forget about this. You're halfway through your shift. I'm jumping out this window and I'm not looking back. So they had to put nets in. So when people talk about let's bring back the factory jobs, they're bringing the suicide nets with them. Don't forget that. Speaking of suicide nets, I actually did want to talk a little bit about remote work and how all of that plays into this. So it's like, it's not just the factory jobs that are soul crushing, right? You can have a soul crushing job that you do, at your home in your underpants, right? Which is why as a remote worker, I encourage you and anyone else who works from home to put your own suicide nets in. Sometimes it might just save your life. It saved mine a couple of times. And listen, you know exactly the scenarios I'm talking about, right? It's like it's Monday. It's like halfway through the day. It's like 11:30 and you're like, oh, the day is just dragging and dragging. And then there's a new unexpected deadline and you can't even work on it because you got to sit on a Zoom meeting that you're not even paying attention to, but it looks bad if you don't go. And you're just like, oh my God. And listen, we've all been in there and we've all tried jumping out the window to die. We've all, listen, I've been there. Happened to me just last week. So there's no shame in it. And I do encourage everyone, get your own home suicide nets, right? It's not just the factory workers anymore. It's everyone. Anyway, let's get back to Fisher. So Fisher draws from Swiss economist Christian Marazzi on when the exact transition really began. Quote, October 6th, 1979. It was on that date that the Federal Reserve increased interest rates by 20 points, preparing the way for the supply-side economics that would constitute the economic reality in which we are now enmeshed. Another thing I forgot to mention with neoliberalism is you get a whole bunch of these tax cuts for rich people. We used to tax the hell out of them. Now we don't really tax them at all. And we basically just print money and just give it to businesses. Right? You look at a lot of the biggest companies today, they're in bed with the government, right? We just print it out and then we call it a free market, man. It's wild. It is very wild. But that's neoliberalism. It's neoliberalism, bro. And I think on the personal level, the vibe shift that happened for workers, we ushered in essentially an era of flexibility, right? I'm sure it's a word that you hear and it's like, oh God, no, not more flexibility. Because we became a lot less like artisans or experts. We became a lot more like temp workers, right? And that really was ushered in with this transition from Forwardism to post-Forwardism, right? It was proliferated with office work that kind of gave rise in the 90s, right? No one's really an expert at things like Microsoft Office, right? You cannot be a master of that, right? I mean, try to present yourself. Listen, man, I know how to make Microsoft Office actually work. I know how to move the picture without destroying the entire document. That's not really a good skill, right? It's not marketable in the traditional sense of like, someone who used to be like a real artisan, right? Like a cobbler. We're no longer artisans, right? We're just familiar enough with the tools to do the job. And that's it. No more, because it's not needed, right? Why on earth would you waste your life mastering Microsoft Office when, for the most part, right, once you work your job long enough, there's like 5 things you actually use it for, and you don't need to know anything other than those like 5 basic things. So at the time, this transition, it really ushered in an era where it felt like there was more freedom, right? Again, factory work is terrible. And coming away from that was like, it was at least perceived as a good thing. I don't actually want to work in a factory myself. I don't think most people actually want to work in a factory. In fact, the few people I know who do work in factories are not that happy about it. So this transition seems like progress, but it gave way to this, increasingly precarious working conditions. Fisher writes, quote, "The consequence is, Marazi argues, that post-Fordist workers are like the Old Testament Jews after they left the house of slavery, liberated from a bondage to which they have no wish to return, but also abandoned, stranded in the desert, confused about the way forward." And I think this quote really highlights the transient nature of modernity, of capitalist realism, of our lived experience, man. Everything is just in constant flux. There's no stability. And it's like, where do we even go, right? I don't think, let's bring back the factory work and we're just all going to sit on an assembly line for 40, 50 hours a week. I don't think that's a valid option, right? But we don't know what other direction to go. What do you do? Where do you guys, we're trapped. And I think Fisher does a really good job of highlighting how this subjectively lived experience that we're all going through expresses itself in our culture. And I think one of my favorite examples from the book he gives is, right, gangster movies. So he highlights the difference between The Godfather, which was made in 1972, and Heat, which was made in 1995. So in The Godfather, you've got crime done by families, they've got links to the old countries, right? The Italian mafia, right? It's cool, right? These are people that, they're violent gangsters and mobsters and they do a bunch of bad stuff, but they actually, believe in things and they have like a culture and, they'll die for their family. And it's like, there's almost something noble about that, right? There's something admirable. And even if you don't actually want to, I don't think it's about actually wanting to become a mobster. I think it's about, oh yeah, these criminals, like, they actually believe in stuff, and it's kind of cool to believe in stuff. And then you compare it to Heat, right? And these are these rootless crews in the interchangeable designer kitchens and featureless freeways of Los Angeles. These are people who have no connections to anyone, to anything, not even to their own gang, right? It's just to themselves, right? And it really is like it's almost like a Darwinian survival of the fittest kind of thing. They just don't believe in anything. They don't care about anything. So I think this quote that Fisher quotes in the book that comes from the Heat movie, "Don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat. if you feel the heat around the corner. And I think this does a really good job of capturing what it's like to be a worker in a post-Fordist society. It's a casualized workforce, and we're expected to be endlessly flexible. And the end result is we have no attachments to anyone, to anything, not even to our craft, right? I mean, there could be some kind of new piece of software that comes out tomorrow that fundamentally changes everything about how you do your job. And we're kind of living through that, right? I mean, with the rise of AI, now it's, there's a lot of white collar work that's like, imagine doing this without AI, bro. Forget about that. I'm not writing this entire email. I'm not writing all these, words that barely anyone's even going to read. They're only going to skim it at best. I'm going to let AI write this, right? So that's just like one little example today, but I think it just really highlights like everything's in constant flux. Don't get attached to anything. Don't be an artisan, essentially. So everything sucked before with Forwardism, but even after all this change, all this progress, everything still sucks, and that's where we are. And it really raises an important question. Who do you get mad at? Where do you direct your anger, your resentment, your rage? And I think this highlights one of the most important ideas from capitalist realism. Fisher talked about the centralessness of capitalism. It is essentially a beast. It is a system where, we're all kind of like rats running through a maze. There is no center, right? There's not even like scientists throwing us in this maze, right? We're just doing it. It is like a maze of self-creation. And it's very sad. It's demoralizing. Everyone is angry and pissed off all the time. And there's clearly a lot wrong here, but there's not even anyone to direct your rage at. I mean, back in the day, right, you could, like, oh, Ronald Reagan, he's responsible for all of it. Let's protest. Let's make his life a living hell, right? And that seemed like something to do at the time, right? But Ronald Reagan has passed away. And it's like, we've not ushered in a utopia. If anything, we've just continued down the road to hell. Things have only gotten worse. And things keep getting worse. So it's like, where do you direct your rage at? Is it really the people at the top? Or is it just this power structure that we've created that ruins everything that it touches? And I think Fisher highlights a real good, probably the best symbolic thing that represents this centralessness, right? The call center. Fisher writes, quote, "As a consumer in late capitalism, you increasingly exist in two distinct realities, the one in which the services are provided without hitch, and another reality entirely. The crazed, Kafkaesque labyrinth of call centers, a world without memory, where cause and effect connect together in mysterious, unfathomable ways, where it is a miracle that anything ever happens, and you lose hope of ever passing back over to the other side, where things seem to function smoothly." We all have that experience, right? We all do. We've all got some horrible Kafkaesque story, whether it's like some kind of refund or replacement or tech support. Raise your hand if you've ever screamed at one of those robots while trying to navigate, tech support, right? You spend good money on a product. It's kind of expensive, but you're like, oh, I'll treat myself, right? My life is a living hell. I'll treat myself. You finally do it. You get it. It doesn't work. You waited all this time. You deferred gratification. You finally got the thing and it doesn't work. Are you kidding, bro? I can't handle this. So you spend an entire day online trying to fix it yourself, but there are no solutions online that actually work. So you end up on calls, the tech support, right? And then you got to deal with the AI and you're screaming at these robots and you're just sad and angry. Who do you get mad at? Right? Is it even the company? Do they even know it doesn't work in this way? How do you pass on this feedback? I just want to fix my damn computer and get on with my life. And that's how it feels, man. That is how it feels. So, the invisible fist of the free market keeps punching you in the face. How do you punch an invisible fist? I think that is the quintessential question of our lives, man. How do you fight an invisible fist? Because you feel it. I feel it. Everyone feels. Even the rich people feel it. They're getting punched in the face too, in a different way, right? It's a little nicer to the rich people, but we're all getting punched in the face by this system that is abstract, that can't really be tamed, that just keeps going and going and going. Oh man, wild stuff. Wild stuff. So I included a quote from Franz Kafka's The Trial, which is a wonderful book. I do encourage you to read that book as well. But I think this quote really encapsulates what the hell is going on here. Quote, "The court wants nothing from you. It receives you when you come and dismisses you when you go." But instead of the court, right, it's just the system, right? The system wants nothing from you. It receives you when you come and dismisses you when you go. And I think that is the perfect encapsulation of the capitalism that we live under. It is abstract, and it is just out there, and it's punching you in the face with this giant fist. And who do you punch, man? You can't even punch the invisible fist. It's invisible. Damn. So I think this is a perfect point where I want to share a personal story. So many years ago, I was a happy young man, a very happy young man. And then I got in a car accident. It was not my fault. As if you're watching the video version of this episode, you can see these are pretty bad pictures, right? I've been told by a lot of people that I am very lucky to be alive, which I think is true. But when I got in that accident, it wasn't my fault, right? Some old man, basically drove straight into me. So the insurance company, right? They were supposed to give me some dollar bills so I could get a new car at least, right? I mean, I was in an accident, wasn't my fault. So I get money so I can still drive and exist in society. But there was a catch. 3 long months of sitting on hold and calling different insurance agents and how do I move forward and go fill out this form on this one website. And then the website doesn't work and oh my God. I almost had a mental breakdown. In fact, it's been a while now, so I've probably repressed most of the memories associated with it, but it was excruciating, man. It was painful. I remember looking at my some of my friends and family at the time, and I was like, man, I wish I had just died in the car accident. That way I wouldn't have to deal with this horrible nightmare of this insurance. Everyone laughed, but I was not kidding. Not totally kidding, at least. But I think that, that story just really highlights all of these systems that touch our lives. They are broken. They are inefficient. They don't even really work. I mean, it was just such a nightmare trying to get the insurance money that was rightfully mine. I didn't cause this accident. Bro, I just want to get a car so I can keep driving to work. Come on. But we've got all these broken systems, but they're inflexible. Right? They don't change. They'll never get fixed. What do you even do? What do you even do? And here we can have another quote from Kafka's The Trial. Quote, "The only correct approach was to accept things as they were. Even if it were possible to improve minor details, one would at best have achieved something for future cases." Now, I think this quote also highlights probably one of the most demoralizing and dehumanizing aspects of what's going on here. And I think this is kind of present as subtext in capitalist realism as well. But essentially, thinking in systems is discouraged, right? Don't think about how to improve things. Don't think about how, if we just did this slightly different, it would be a much less painful experience. We're discouraged to think that way. Because why on earth would you, right? You're not really going to be able to benefit from it yourself. And let's be real, right? The reality is that even if you go out of your way to try to say, hey, what if we did, it wasn't a 3-month-long nightmare. It's sitting on hold and filling out forms and yada, yada, yada. What if you just got your money from insurance when horrible things happened to you? And you didn't have to be traumatized a second time, right? Wouldn't that be nice? It would be. It would be, but let's be real. They don't care. They're not going to implement any change based on your feedback. They don't give a shit. So it's broken. Just accept it as it is, because guess what, bro? There ain't no changing it. Kafka continues, quote, "If you changed something at the place you occupied, you would be cutting the ground from under your own feet and might well fall, while the great organism could easily find a replacement for the minor disruption at some other part, and remain unchanged, assuming it did not become even more self-enclosed, even more vigilant, even more severe, even more malevolent." Damn, I love that quote. That is a good book, man. Go read The Trial by Kafka, man. It is a wild read. Especially because of some banger quotes like this. But I think this one right here really captures just don't think about the system, just worry about yourself, man. And I think it is very much reinforced with our culture, where we are encouraged to just not think about anyone else, right? Just focus on yourself, right? And again, I want to highlight, I think one really important idea, especially in Fisher's realism, but also everywhere else. This also applies to the people at the top, right? They are just as alienated and miserable as everyone else. Again, they're also getting punched in the face by the invisible fist. It's a little nicer to them, but they're still getting punched by that fist. Fisher writes, quote, "Does anyone really think, for instance, that things would improve if we replaced the whole managerial and banking class with a whole new set of better people? Surely, on the contrary, it is evident that the vices are engendered by the structure, and that while the structure remains, the vices will reproduce themselves." So the people at the top, right, I don't even think they're necessarily bad people, right? And maybe this is a controversial take, right? We're kind of capitalist realism, very lefty. We're supposed to be mad at the people at the top, right? Eat the rich. I don't think that they're even primarily responsible. This is a horrible, nightmarish system, and they are who they are because the system made them that way, man. I don't think it helps anyone to point your finger and say, oh, so-and-so is evil, right? This is what we did during Reagan's time, right? Where did it get us? Did it stop the demoralizing effects of capitalist realism? Did it stop the invisible fist from punching you in the face? No, it did not. It did not because, right, it's an invisible fist. How do you fight an invisible fist? So you individually cannot fix things. And I think this is a great quote. Fisher writes, quote, "The delusion that many who enter into management with high hopes is precisely that they, the individual, can change things, that they will not repeat what their managers had done, that things will be different this time. But watch someone step into management, and it's usually not very long before the gray petrification of power starts to subsume them. It is here that structure is palpable. You can practically see it taking people over. Here it's deadening judgment, speaking through them. Sooner or later, the system will get you." And I've personally experienced this too. I've known people who go into the management, higher leadership positions. It just repeats themselves, man. Fisher hit the nail on the head with this quote. And it's a real tragedy because this is one of those quotes that I don't think enough people highlight or bring attention to. Because once you get up there, man, you cannot individually fix things. The problems that we're dealing with are invisible. They're systemic. It's the system itself. It's not the people who run the system or even the people who benefit from the system. Things are broken, man. Things are very broken. And I think this highlights probably one of the most doomer-ish aspects to capitalist realism. No one even really believes in capitalism anymore, right? One thing you'll often hear with people who ostensibly, try to defend the system, right? You talk to mild conservatives or whatever, and you'll often hear stuff like, well, it's not perfect, but at least we're not North Korea, right? Which is not really a valid defense, right? People don't even really believe in this shit anymore. Everyone knows the system sucks. But again, nothing changes, right? We just expect it to suck, and it is what it is. Fisher writes, quote, "The role of capitalist ideology is not to make an explicit case for something in the way that propaganda does, but to conceal the fact that the operations of capital do not depend on any sort of subjectively assumed belief. It is impossible to conceive of fascism or Stalinism without propaganda, but capitalism can proceed perfectly well, in some ways better, without anyone making a case for it." Damn, what a good quote, man. You know, I just gotta say, Fisher, what a good writer he was. God, rest in peace, absolute legend. Because this perfectly encapsulates it. This is what's going on. No one even really believes in this shit anymore, right? I mean, the people on the right, I mean, they're not really even talking about capitalism. Talking about like traditional Western values and, and shit like that. Because they don't have to make a case for capitalism anymore, right? It is. It simply is. And we've all been sucked into the face punching machine. And the end result is that we've got this passive acceptance of the status quo. Fisher writes, quote, "It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism." So I think it's pretty clear now, right? If you are watching this, I hope at the very least you have some connection to reality. And it's becoming increasingly clear that, the way things are going, right, we are almost certainly headed towards some kind of apocalypse. I don't think it's, you're a nut job or a weirdo if you think that. I mean, maybe it's climate change, maybe it's something to do with pollution, right? We destroy the planet, it's no longer inhabitable. Maybe it's some kind of nuclear thing, right? Maybe it's some other stuff, right? Like, who knows, right? Who knows? No one. Man, there are so many, we have messed with so many systems and biology and nature, and it's like, who knows how it's all going to end, man? Who the hell knows? But we all know something bad is coming. I don't think prepper culture would be so popular if not. Now, one of the quotes that Fisher included, actually comes from Margaret Thatcher, who, if you're not familiar with British politics, she's basically the Ronald Reagan of the UK. And she famously declared, "There is no alternative." And I think she puts it perfectly well, right? This is just what the system is. It's going to punch you in the face, but guess what? It's either this or North Korea, buddy. Get used to it. Another funny little quote I wanted to include here actually comes from Zygmunt Bauman's Liquid Modernity. And he which is a good book. I might cover that in the future episodes if you guys are interested. So let me know in the comments. But he wrote that, essentially he took a play on that famous Clausewitz quote, right? Clausewitz, the famous German general, he said something like, war is politics by other means, right? But Bauman subverts it, right? War today looks increasingly like the promotion of global free trade by other means, right? And if that isn't the perfect summing up of what the hell is going on here, I don't know what is, man. So perfectly, silly little quote. War is just the promotion of global free trade by other means. Bam! But I do have good news, right? Maybe we can't imagine an alternative. Maybe most people can. I can. So I'm going to give you a little pitch on what I think can replace capitalism. What if, instead of exchanging money, we exchanged ass slaps? I call it the kink economy. Think about it. It actually works perfectly, right? You've heard a lot of people say, I'm sure, money is the root of all evil. I've heard rich people say it, I've heard poor people say it, and everyone in between. Why not replace it with something that no one has ever called the root of all evil? Slapping ass, right? Have you ever heard someone say that? I haven't, right? Slapping ass, the root of all evil. It's a sentence that has been said for the first time right here on the Murphy Monologues. You heard it here, folks. We are bringing new sentences into existence here. And it might sound absurd, but the craziest ideas are the ones that turn out to be true. I've conducted peer-reviewed research, and the evidence is conclusive. Slapitalism solves supply and demand, alienation, and erectile dysfunction. As you may know, the three biggest problems plaguing our economy today. Sitting is the new smoking? Not anymore, because you can't afford to sit. No, but on a serious note, right, the real problem with capitalism is that it numbs you. Can't bear to feel anything is just too painful. At least now, you'll be able to feel again, even if it stings a little bit. All right, I'm done. I promise that was it. We're getting a little too stupid here. So let's get back to it. But to sum up this entire little section here, capitalism is an assault on our collective imaginations. Can't imagine a political alternative because we've not known a real alternative our entire lives, and it's increasingly difficult to imagine anything better. Anything. One of the ways that Fisher really highlights this problem is through the cultural stagnation. So essentially, what's been going on is our culture has stopped producing the new. And this is not unique to our age, right? Marx was literally saying this back when he was writing in the 1800s. In fact, Fisher actually quotes him, and this is a good one, so I included it here. Marx writes, quote, "Capital has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation." So even back in the time of Marx, capital is eating culture. Fisher writes, quote, "A culture that is merely preserved is no culture at all." So I think this is a really wonderful line, but I think we need to unpack it a little bit. But this is how I read this. So culture is natural, right? It's natural, it's universal. People create things, right? Language and stories and pictures and art and religion and, all these different things. This is what makes life worth living. But now, the entirety of culture is increasingly subservient to business interests, right? And as you may have heard, it's really difficult to be creative when you're being punched in the face. Try writing, the next Moby Dick when someone is punching you in the face with a giant invisible fist, right? It's not the easiest thing to do. So what you end up with is a culture that is forcing artists to be completely obsessed with how every little action is going to make money, how it's going to serve the bottom line, how it's going to reinforce their brand. Essentially there's no room for experimentation or creativity in any meaningful sense of the word. I mean, you look at some of the biggest movies these days and right? We see a lot of sequels. We see a lot of prequels. We see a whole, basically every popular IP, right? Every popular brand or intellectual property essentially has to become its own cinematic universe. And that's because there's just simply no room for people to create something new. Because guess what? If something is like truly new, like it's, especially if it's a movie or music or, something that requires a lot of effort from many people, right? That's an investment. And every investment is a risk. So why on earth would you throw money at something risky when you know that you can, create another Superman sequel? And that's definitely going to make at least some money. So the culture that ends up being created is culture that is profitable, right? Not something that pushes anything forward, not something that challenges the way people think. It is just culture that essentially remixes what worked in the past. And this is why there's such a, like a never-ending loop of nostalgia going on, right? I mean, as much as we can all love and appreciate, like the 80s vibes, the 70s vibes and all that, I mean, it is a very sad sign of the times that we have to rely on past cultural expression in order to express ourselves because Even our most creative people can no longer imagine anything new. That's a real, it's really sad. It's kind of terrifying when you really think about it. We can't imagine anything new. So just like we can't imagine an alternative to capitalism, we can't even imagine new cultural forms of expression. We can't even imagine new things to say or new songs to sing or new movies. No new stories. We're stuck in a loop. And that's why our culture, it is just being preserved. It's not being created. It's not expanding. It's contracting. And it's dying. But actually, it's not just that nothing ever changes. Things are getting even worse. So, and this is just one little example that I want to highlight here because I think it just shows what a terrible dystopia we live in. So there is a Black Mirror episode, Be Right Back. Wonderful episode, by the way. If you've not watched it yet, you definitely should. But it's about this company that essentially takes your dead loved one and uses all their, text messages, what they look like, their DNA, all these kinds of, super high tech, fancy stuff, basically brings them back to life, right? Now this is like a droid, right? Some kind of robot, it's also, so it's like, imagine ChatGPT was trained on your loved one's, words and text messages and all that. And then that was like super beamed into a robot, right? And that's essentially what this episode is. It is terrifying. But instead of like making our society feel hesitant about messing around with that kind of thing, right? I see the, oh man, this company is like exploiting people's most vulnerable emotions for profit, and they're doing it bad. And there's all these uncanny, weird side effects that come out of that. Instead of that being our collective, takeaway, there are literally AI startups today, right now. Like there are people building this. It's not a warning, right? Our dystopia is like creating the future. I mean, it's so messed up when you think about it, right? So there are some examples. There's like Hereafter AI, Project December, Deep Brain's AI's Rememory, and many more, right? I'm sure these are just some of the ones I found in like 5 minutes of Google searching, but it's like, go look around. There are plenty of startups that are like, listen, we'll bring your dead loved ones back to life, and it's not going to quite be them, but at least you'll get to talk to them again with our product. It's messed up. It is messed up, man. So our dystopia no longer criticizes anything, really. If anything, our dystopian fiction is like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we brought this horrible reality into existence? And like, no one bats an eye, man. So there's also another really important idea that I want to talk about that Fisher had, a completely new term that he coined here. But in order to get there, I think we need to start with something called recuperation, right? Now, if you are not familiar with all the, intellectual mumbo jumbo that you get with this kind of thing, I don't blame you. There's a lot of boring shit out there, right? I don't have the tolerance to read a whole lot of, philosophers because, let's be real, a lot of it, they say very little in a lot of words, right? We all know those writers. I'm looking at you, Michel Foucault. I'm looking at you, bro. But recuperation, I think, is important to explain. So essentially, this is the idea that when you have a status quo, you've got the system, the status quo, what everyone believes, and then you've got culture that comes along and says, hey, this is not the right way to live, right? There's all these horrible problems, and maybe we shouldn't live these lives this way, right? What if the system is actively harming you? What if all of these systems and institutions actually suck, right? So, and this is where you get a whole bunch of really subversive culture, right? You get things, I think The Simpsons is a good example, right? It came around, it got popular because it poked fun at, people in power, at how broken our economy is, at, underfunded public schools, and and politicians are all corrupt. And I think it's a really powerful way to bring people's attention to the fact that, hey, maybe we don't live in a utopia. Maybe, right? At least gets people asking the right questions. But then recuperation comes along and it sucks up that revolutionary energy, right? Because if you have, things that poke fun or criticize the system, there's hope for change, right? It doesn't have to lead to, some kind of violent revolution. It can, ideally people in power are like, oh, hey, this is a valid criticism. Let's actually fix this, right? That doesn't happen. Instead, what happens is the people in power recuperate it, right? They use their infinite money to buy the shit and they basically pacify it. So this previously subversive culture now serves the very status quo it was designed to criticize. And I think the reason I use The Simpsons as an example is because they've not been criticizing the status quo for a very, very long time. Fans today call it the zombie Simpsons, and I think for a damn good reason, right? They don't actually attack power in any meaningful way. They are, it is like the mask of rebellion, but without actually rebelling against anything, right? And typically when you talk about recuperation, you'll get a whole bunch of these examples, people selling Che Guevara t-shirts, right? Che Guevara was this communist revolutionary, and here we are selling t-shirts with his face on it. Yeah, what's going on, bro? Why you buying a t-shirt? Another one is like Martin Luther King Jr., right? He was like one of the foremost radical thinkers of his time, but he's essentially been defanged, right? The Martin Luther King Jr. that we are presented today with pop culture is like not subversive. He's not, his dream has not been actualized, but we pretend it has been. I think another example is Christianity in the Middle Ages. At the time, Christianity was like, I think it's pretty safe to say it's kind of opposed to the empire, right? I mean, Jesus got killed by the Roman Empire. This is not necessarily the most like pro-Caesar, pro-empire thing there is. But somewhere along the way, the empires of the world figured out, oh, hey, if you just don't let the people read the Bible, you can tell them that Christianity is pro-empire. And what do you know? Bada bing, bada boom. This previously subversive culture has been recuperated, and now it serves the very status quo it set out to maybe not destroy, but at least challenge, right? Provide an alternative. But Fisher brings it even darker, man. Fisher is like, what if? What if subversive culture was recuperated before it was even created? Whoa, what? And this is where we get the notorious term pre-corporation. Fisher writes, quote, "What we are dealing with now is not the incorporation of materials that previously seemed to possess subversive potentials, but instead their pre-corporation, the preemptive formatting and shaping of desires, aspirations, and hopes by capitalist culture." So the implication here is that it's no longer possible to do any kind of rebellion, right? You are not just recuperated, you are pre-corporated from the start, right? Pre-corporation operates at the level of human imagination. We cannot even conceive of culture as being independent from capital, right? I mean, talk to anyone who's like into, whatever kind of cultural thing, right? Whether it's music or art or painting or whatever it is, right? They're already, from the very start that they have any inclination to do that kind of thing, they're already trying to figure out how to make it fit within the system. How do I turn this into a side project? How do I turn this into a business? How do I become a celebrity? It's messed up. Very messed up. But like many things that Fisher wrote about, messed up, but very true and real. So let's bring it back to The Simpsons. What if the Simpsons were not really recuperated? What if, from the very beginning, it was never really about challenging the status quo? What if the Simpsons were pre-corporated from the very beginning? And if you think about it, it's really not that much of a stretch to make that case. I mean, let's be real, it operated with the promotion and the support from the media industrial complex. They put this stuff on TV. To what extent was it really challenging the status quo? Did anyone really make any significant changes to themselves or to their systems or to politics or anything as a result of, criticisms from the Simpsons? Like, I don't think so. I mean, if you remember that alien episode where the aliens come down and then you got two aliens running for president. There was that funny line about how, well, like, you got to vote for one of us, right? And it's really sad because it had all of these really powerful criticisms, but nothing ever changed. Nothing has happened as a result. We've focused our attention collectively. I mean, millions of people are now aware of, like, oh, hey, look at all these problems. Look at how poorly funded the schools are. Look at how corrupt the politicians are. Look at the problems with the two-party system. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Was The Simpsons pre-corporated from the start? Or was it just recuperated? I don't know. I'll let you make your mind up on that one. So, Fisher gave a really good example of Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. He writes, quote, "In his dreadful lassitude and objectless rage, Cobain seemed to give wearied voice to the despondency of the generation that had come after history, whose every move was anticipated, tracked, bought, and sold before it had even happened. Cobain knew that he was just another piece of spectacle, that nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV. Knew that his every move was a cliche scripted in advance. Knew that even realizing it is a cliche." Damn, that's a sad quote. But this is pre-corporation in action. It's not that you fight the system and the system wins, but the fight has already been won before it's even begun. The system already won. There's no fighting it, can't challenge it, and yeah, it's very sad. It's very makes you feel impotent, right? I mean, there are a lot of people out there who like really actually care about like things like culture and music and art and all these kinds of things, and it's like it almost makes you feel like, man, there's no fighting this damn system, right? If I don't find some kind of way to pre-corporate my material, I'm just gonna be some weirdo painting things alone in his house. No one's even gonna look at the shit. It's sad. It's really sad. Fisher continues, quote, "Here even success meant failure, since to succeed would only mean that you were the new meat on which the system could feed." Damn, bro. This is a lot, right? This is a lot. I remember the first time I read this, I was like, oh my God, Fisher, bro, calm down. Dude, I put the book down, had to cry it out for a little bit. Oh God. Oh God. And I think a really good example actually is Squid Game. So essentially this was at one point like the most popular show on earth, right? It was like the most popular show on the most popular streaming platform. I mean, hell, everyone was talking about it. And it's kind of wild, right? Because it is a very pointed, direct criticism of capitalism, right? This is what life feels like under capitalism. And a lot of people watch this shit and they were like, oh my God, this is not some silly little story with people playing games. This is what my life feels like. And that's terrifying. It is very terrifying. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a criticism and it became more spectacle. It became more meat for the system to feed on, right? I mean, I think it started with Mr. Beast doing his whole, what if we did the Squid Games, but in real life? But, obviously no one died, right? Hopefully, right? That we know of. But it essentially took the impact of the criticism away. You were supposed to watch Squid Game and be terrified and, hopefully inspire some change in the world. But now it's a silly game show on YouTube, right? And it's not just Mr. Beast, right? It's been like the entire way that the brand has unfolded. They got a season 2, which, let's be real, the show happened, and I haven't seen season 2. I can't speak to it in depth, but I think it was fine. It was perfect the way it was. You don't need a season 2. It just worked. Can you not just create culture and just let it be good culture? No. This is a profitable intellectual property, and we're going to milk it because this is meat, and the system wants to eat meat. So they got a season 2. There's also like the Netflix did their own silly game show equivalent, basically ripping off Mr. Beast. And it just, turned into this dumpster fire, right? It spiraled, it went down the tubes. And something that was at one time a powerful criticism of this system that's punching us in the face is now just, more silly amusement, right? More spectacle, more hoopla, more nonsense. And that, my friend, is very sad. Now, I can't talk about a whole lot of other stuff, but what I can talk about is how I think this applies to digital culture. So if you talk to any creatively inspired youths, the youngins, anyone who feels inspired to pursue a craft of any kind, right? Whether it's, YouTube or, painting or digital art or, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is they're into, they're instantly thinking about how this turns into money and fame. One of the big things that is prioritized under this new way of cultural production is immediate profitability is like the most important thing, right? Because when you operate a media business, right, if you're doing something that's not making money right now, you basically have to stop, right? I think this is where, the recent news where PBS and, Elmo and Sesame Street and all that is getting defunded is actually very bad news, because culture shouldn't have to be immediately concerned with turning a profit, because what ends up being created, right? It's not stuff that pushes the culture forward. It's not culture that challenges people to think. It is stuff that needs to be instantly profitable and needs to be making money day one. You need shareholders to approve its production. And we all know how damn imaginative the shareholders are, right? The same people who are making the, Marvel Cinematic Universe, bro. We're going to make 15 different Spider-Mans every year, right? It's sad. It's really sad. I mean, at least for digital culture, right? You can see it in the Mr. Beastification of YouTube. Everything is just hyper stimulating. It is, there's always an explosion going on, fast cuts, right? There needs to be like a dopamine hit every 3 seconds or you're going to lose people's interest. And what ends up happening is you get an entire culture where, social media essentially promotes people like P.T. Barnum, right? A whole bunch of people that are just good at getting people's attention, right? Some sensationalist nonsense. And then it pulls people in and is just stimulating enough that they watch it all the way through or they read the entire thing, whatever it is, right? It is just good enough at making money, and that is our digital culture. And it is very sad and possibly destroying our brains. Oh, what a transition. So I think this is something worth considering here, because there's been a lot of development in this world since Fisher wrote this, right? I don't remember when Capitalist Realism was published. It's a couple of years ago now. But in the time that, it's been published to now, things have gotten so much worse, right? So when you think about algorithmic visibility, right, the what the TikTok algorithm, the YouTube algorithm, what the algorithms tell us to look at, right? This is pre-corporation on steroids, because anything that maybe we could have at least created something in a vacuum before, but now even if something gets created that is like not directly serving capital, via the algorithm, it doesn't even, even if it is created, it doesn't get seen. It's impossible for it to be seen by people, because guess what? Algorithms are owned by private corporations, and they are tweaked and mastered so that they are maximizing profit. And it's a feedback mechanism where they collect more data. The more data they collect, the more addictive they can make their algorithm. And this is why algorithms are actually very scary. And we're starting to see the long-term impacts of algorithms that got too good. What we can call brain rot. And I think that there's a good argument to be made that, when you're in the entirety of culture is pre-corporated and you're tuned into this shit, you end up just rotting your own brain. So brain rot was the Oxford Word of the Year for 2024. And it's a very scary term because you can see it in people, right? You can see it in people who have spent way too much time doom scrolling TikTok or Instagram Reels or, whatever your drug of choice is, right? New York Times writes about brain rot, quote, "One of the easiest ways to tell if someone's brain has been destroyed by social media is to notice how often they reference internet jargon." So this is one of the most important, the most telling signs of brain rot, right? How often do they say things that reference like the latest viral meme, right? The latest little hoopla going on. And I think this, and maybe I'm like an old grumpy man, when I say this, but I really think that it has something to do with short form video. You could make the case that brain rot was prevalent to some extent before, right? But with short form video being shoved in all our faces, hijacking our attention, it is on full display, man. Full display. So the Harvard linguist graduate Alan Alexic wrote on his Substack, quote, "Brain rot is when words get repeated as memes to the point of nonsensicality." Right? So essentially what ends up happening with this brain rot culture, right, where everyone's hyper online, everyone sees the same passing fads on TikTok, and the same videos get reposted on every other platform, right? So there's not that much originality. One random thing goes viral, it keeps going, and then everyone is familiar with like some weird, random, obscure internet thing. And it's actually very strange, right, when you analyze it, because we don't even refer to the original context of the thing, right? So, I got a couple of examples here. I'm not super tuned into, the youth culture, so I apologize if I am an old man speaking about something he knows nothing about. But like there are some examples, right? So gyat, right? This is like a stand-in word for ass, right? There's riz, right? This is a stand-in for charisma. But when you hear people talk about these words, right, it no longer even really refers to like an actual thing, right? When people say gyat, like it's almost too cringe to say as an actual word in like real life, right? So instead, what people actually say is like, "Oh, gyat," and then like, it's almost like a signifier for internet addiction, right? Alexic argues that these internet words are treated more like, "Oh, haha, funny word," right? "Oh, you saw the latest TikTok too." And that's essentially what's going on here, because it's too chronically online, we're too brain rotted, and these words don't even mean anything. But I got a question for you, a wild one. What if words had no actual meaning? Funny enough, there's a term that actually describes that, which comes from semiotics. And if you've never heard of semiotics before, it is an obscure branch of anthropology known as the study of signs. Very interesting stuff, actually. I do encourage you to look into that. I've had it on my like backlog to look into for a very long time. It's very cool shit. Very cool. But they've got a term for words that have no actual meanings, and they are floating signifiers. So, David Chandler, the author of Semiotics for Beginners, describes floating signifiers as, quote, a signifier with a vague, highly variable, unspecifiable, or non existent signified. And I think this is really what's going on with our culture, man. You know, you look at it, words that don't actually refer to anything. I mean, this is what these brain rot, chronically online internet memes have become. They just don't mean anything. Or it's like the meaning changes so frequently, right? I mean, I'm sure you've heard, seen like, especially with like culture wars, I think is a good example. There will be like a company or a brand, like they do something that's interpreted as like, vaguely left. Oh, they're doing the transgender bathroom thing. They're woke. And suddenly like, Target is like seen as like some kind of communist thing or whatever, right? Or, it'll go in the other direction where it's like a company will be like, yeah, we believe in free markets, bro, freedom, and then suddenly that company is now associated with, freedom, right? Like what, it's like hollow signifiers all the way around. And it changes so frequently that, man, nothing has any damn meaning. Nothing. And funny enough, this is actually the basis of the Matrix movies. And it didn't originally inspire that. This actually all started with Jean Baudrillard's hyperreality. This is maybe a little obscure for, some of you internet folks out there. But Jean Baudrillard, very cool postmodern thinker. I don't agree with everything he says, but I do think it is very interesting. And he's got this book, something like simulation and simulacra, right? Essentially he coined this idea of hyperreality, where basically nothing has any fixed meaning, right? One of the big analogies he uses in the book is, he compares an empire to a map, right? And as time goes on, the empire changes or it contracts or it expands, and the map, right? The map is no longer signifying what is going on in reality. Right? So there's essentially no relationship between how we talk about things and the things themselves. So again, this inspired The Matrix, right? Funny enough, they required everyone on set to read Baudrillard's book, which is really sad because, shortly after the movies came out, Baudrillard roasted the movie. He basically, he's like, oh, I inspired one of the most popular pop culture movies of all time. Let's take a shit on it. I can respect that though, right? I can respect that. At least he actually believes in something. So Baudrillard writes of the Matrix movies, quote, "The Matrix is surely the kind of film about the Matrix that the Matrix would have been able to produce." Absolute savage. God bless Baudrillard. One of funniest philosopher of all time. Just for this one line, right? Just for this one line. But anyway, let's bring it back to Fisher here, because I do think this ties into what is increasingly going on these days with culture. So Fisher talks about this idea of interpassivity. So what's going on with pop culture now under capitalist realism is that we know that, the system sucks. We know it's broken. We know we're getting punched in the face by that invisible fist, right? So we can no longer be, in favor of this system where we've got to oppose it. So what's going on now is pop culture is performing our anti-capitalism for us. So one of the examples that he gives in the book is, something like WALL-E, right? So what's going on is that this is a movie that is ostensibly criticizing capitalism, right? We've created this horrible dystopia, all the humans are gone, right? We've got this wasteland, and it's because of the big corporations, right? Guess what? The movie was made by a big corporation. Surely one of the people most responsible for ushering in this horrible dystopian dark age, right? But instead of inspiring change, right, what ends up happening is we have our anti-capitalism performed for us. We don't have to fix the system. We don't have to fight the system. Because guess what, bro? I just watched a movie that said capitalism sucks. I don't have to do anything, right? I've got an ironic distance to this shit, right? You see the same thing in something like the Barbie movie, which, although I did love it, I love the Barbie movie. It's a very good movie. But let's be honest about the fact that this is a movie that is one big toy commercial, right? Barbie sales have gone through the moon since that movie was released. Not a coinkydinko. I think you could also say the same with Squid Game. It performs our anti-capitalism for us. Fisher writes, quote, "We are able to fetishize money in our actions only because we have already taken an ironic distance towards money in our heads." So we don't have to fight the system. All of our pop culture talks hellish shit about the system, right? And it's actually very interesting, right? How strange is it that all of this dystopian fiction and these movies, and they all, ostensibly criticize our day and age and the system that produces the culture itself, but it doesn't change it, doesn't challenge it, doesn't fight it, right? Again, it goes back to recuperation, right? It is the mask of rebellion without any actual rebellion. Fisher continues, quote, "The ideological blackmail that has been in place since the original Live Aid concerts in 1985 has insisted that caring individuals could end famine directly without the need for any kind of political solution or systemic reorganization." So essentially what was going on with the Live Aid concert was essentially this idea that you can, raise money for these things, right? Just buy the right products. And, if the company promises to give some of the money to some of these horrible problems, we don't need to actually do anything, right? Just buy the right products and you will be fine. So essentially what ends up happening is, we birth a whole bunch of performative band-aid solutions that exist to make us consumers feel like we're doing something. But let's be real, we're not doing anything. We're not doing shit. We're not helping anyone. We're not making a meaningful change. We are just, we're handing people with broken arms a couple of band-aids and patting ourselves on the back for doing so. It's rough. I told you this would be a rough episode, did I not? I was not kidding. And I think, one of the other ways you can see this reflected in our culture is, if you know any of those evangelical Christian types, right? A whole bunch of them, they'll go do these mission trips in the third world. And it's like they take a bunch of selfies. They got a whole bunch of, photos. Oh, I, administered some vaccines to someone in Africa, right? And they want to pat themselves on the back. It's all over their damn Facebooks, right? They want to act like they made a real difference to people, right? Did they? Did they really? I mean, you look at it and it's like a lot of these evangelicals, they live in some pretty messed up communities, right? There's a lot of bad shit going on, all kinds of spousal abuse and, people on drugs, people miserable and suffering. What if you actually just focused your efforts on people you could actually help instead of going and getting selfies of you in the third world, right? What about systemic change? What if we didn't have starving, miserable, suffering people in the first place? Wouldn't that be nice? But again, that's not what we really want. We want to feel like we're doing something so we can pat ourselves on the back and rid ourselves of the guilt of being complacent in a system that causes widespread immiseration of everyone, man. It's messed up. The face-punching machine continues. Fisher writes, quote, "The aim was only to ensure that some of the proceeds of particular transactions went to good causes. The fantasy being that Western consumerism, far from being intrinsically implicated in systemic global inequalities, could itself solve them. All we have to do is buy the right products." And again, I think this really doubles down on that idea that we were talking about earlier, right? Don't think in systems, right? Stop thinking about the system. Stop thinking about how there's all this face punching going on. Just think about yourself. Think about yourself and what you can do. Because guess what, buddy? You ain't doing shit otherwise. There ain't no fixing it. There ain't no changing it. Just accept it for what it is. And if you need to feel like a good person, just pretend, right? Just play make-believe, right? Watch a movie that says capitalism is bad, and you don't have to fight capitalism. Well, whoa, what do you know? Thanks, Wally. Thanks, Squid Game. I think you can really see the way that this kind of thinking has perversely infiltrated something like, the environmentalist movement, right? Instead of criticizing, who actually causes environmental catastrophe, right? The big corporations that are like polluting everything and poisoning shit. And, there's like a giant landfill in the ocean of garbage and it's bigger than Texas. Instead of focusing on the systemic shit that might actually make a difference, you are instead encouraged to calculate your carbon footprint. So don't think about, the systems that produce all this carbon. Sit around and, calculate how much, how many times you flush the toilet and how that's, contributing to environmental catastrophe. Yeah, and it's really perverse, right? It's really perverse because it works. The shit they do this because it works. But it does not hide the truth, and the truth is that individual action alone cannot solve these underlying issues. All it can do, all you are doing, is making yourself feel good, making yourself feel like you are making a difference when you are not. And when you focus so much on the individual, sooner or later, the individual cracks. The individual cracks. Do you remember that famous Nietzsche quote about how when you look into the abyss looks back? I'm starting to think capitalism is the abyss. I mean, the people who see it for what it is and describe it in detail, right, kind of like Mark Fisher did, they kind of go off the deep end. When Fisher wrote Capitalist Realism, I mean, he, bam, hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, the guy is spot on about everything. And it's like, it's not abstract. There's no speculation, right? Like, you just read it and you'll be like, oh God, like that's it. That was kind of my reaction reading it. It's kind of the reaction I have every time I even really think about it for too long. But I actually see a strange continuity from with Fisher going back to the French philosopher Guy Debord, who wrote The Society of the Spectacle. I know that Fisher was, at least partially inspired by Debord. Most people on the left have at least read Debord, at least his famous book, The Society of the Spectacle, which is another, world-shattering takedown of our favorite economic system. We might even cover that book at some point in the future. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in that. Could be quite the spectacle. Oh, I'm sorry. But it's almost a stretch to call these books capitalist criticisms. I mean, to a very large degree, they're just describing the way shit is, right? This is just kind of the world we live in. And when you can look at the abyss for long enough to be like, oh yeah, this is the shape of the abyss. This is the color of the abyss. This is what the abyss makes me feel at night when I'm alone under the blankets. Definitely not looking at inappropriate pictures of women. Definitely not. But yeah, it's very terrifying. It is very terrifying. And I don't think it's a coincidence that so many of these great thinkers who perfectly encapsulate what's going on here, and they just lose it. And I think it's a real tragedy. Like, it's very sad. The people who have done more to try to at least bring our attention to how horrible things are, end up paying the price. It's almost like a sacrifice, right? This is the cost of truth. There's a lot of people on the left, they get a little conspiratorial about it and like, oh man, the CIA whacked him. It's not suicide. It's not a heart attack. And it's the CIA. Listen, I'm not here to defend the CIA. I mean, this podcast is sponsored by the CIA, so thank you to the CIA for that. Not really. But like, they don't need to get you most of the time. You just look at the system long enough, and like the abyss will get you, right? I mean, you look at the abyss long enough, man. Big yikes, right? That is the best way I can describe it. But it's kind of like what I'm always telling the hippies who live near the river on my street. If you don't laugh, you cry. If you don't laugh, you cry. But listen, I hear your concerns. You might not be funny, right? You might not be witty, might not have a funny damn bone in your body. That's okay. That's okay. You don't need it. You can be a stick in the mud and still have a good time. This is how you do it. Don't just laugh at yourself, right? That's cringe, right? Pity laugh at yourself, right? Because if you pity laugh at yourself, right, sooner or later that'll turn into... But listen, I've got the perfect solution. If you want to have a good time, make a joke, right? Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be funny. It doesn't have to be witty. It could be the dumbest joke in the world. Pity laugh at it. Pity laugh at your own bad joke. You do it long enough, it'll turn into a real laugh. You watch, man. That's how I got to start on this podcast. I would just make a joke. It wouldn't be funny at all. I pity laughed at my own dumb joke, and bam, here we are. Here we are, living the dream, man. The happiest man in the world. But anyway, listen, the advice, it worked for the hippies, and if it can work for them, it can work for you too. It can work for you too. I mean, I'm sure the drugs helped them. But it's not a hard requirement. You can be funny and sober, or so I've been told. Maybe. I don't know. This is a really dumb tangent. I'm sorry. Let's get back into this episode before everyone finds my house and doxes me and burns my house down. All right, now that we are done with that, we can move on to the final major topic of this episode, which is the idea that mental illness is political. Fisher writes, quote, "Work and life become inseparable. Capital follows you when you dream. Time ceases to be linear, becomes chaotic, broken down into punctiform divisions. As production and distribution are restructured, so are nervous systems." So we live under this broken, horrible system that sucks, and everyone knows it sucks, but it's like, you just got to deal with it. You got to just adapt to it. And, right, the only way to adapt is maladaptation. I don't think that's really such a stretch. This is life. You got to work a miserable job that hates you and you hate it. And if you don't, you will run out of money and starve and die. And like, this is life. How is it okay to live that way? Right? It's not. It's really not. Fisher writes, quote, "Capital is an abstract parasite, an insatiable vampire and zombie maker. But the living flesh it converts into dead labor is ours, and the zombies it makes are us." Damn. What a line. What a line. Listen, I'm not a big fan of tattoos. I'm kind of a nerd, and I don't like needles. If I got a tattoo, this is going on my forehead. What a damn line right there. Oh my gosh. But it's like, are you crazy for being depressed? Right? I don't think so. Right? I mean, we've essentially created a society where the subjective feeling of depression has become true. Right? This hopelessness, the despair, the idea that nothing's ever gonna get better, because guess what, buddy? It's not. It's done nothing but get worse and worse and worse, and you did everything they told you. You did everything. You got good grades, you were a good kid, you didn't do drugs, you went to college, got all the debt, you worked hard, and you still have nothing. Still have nothing. It is messed up. And now is actually a good time to tell you, here at the Murphy Monologues, we do not believe in using AI generated images. Instead, what we've actually done here is we've outsourced it not to AI, but to our own local child sweatshop. That's right. In my backyard, I've got like 15 kids. They're just sitting there drawing stuff, and hell, they're working on the next episode as we speak. Right? They wrote this bit. Right? That's how good they are. It is wonderful kids. I had to spend a lot of money on suicide nets for them, but it's the cost of business, right? There is no alternative, buddy. There is no alternative. And I hope that doesn't make you too sad because, well, we've got the net to stop you from ending it. Anyway, let's move on. Fisher writes, quote, "Capitalist realism insists on treating mental health as if it were a natural fact, like weather." And this is where we need to really ask the question, is mental illness really a natural fact? Is this just something that happens out of nowhere for no reason to so many people? Fisher is not so convinced. Quote, "It goes without saying that all mental illnesses are neurologically instantiated, but this says nothing about their causation. If it is true, for instance, that depression is constituted by low serotonin levels, what still needs to be explained is why particular individuals have low levels of serotonin. This requires a social and political explanation, and the task of repoliticizing mental illness is an urgent one if the left wants to challenge capitalist realism." And this is not really so radical, right? Is it that we are crazy for being sad when, the system is so great, right? Are we crazy for being depressed? Or is it that we've created a system where depression is kind of an inevitable outcome? I don't know. I got my own take. I'm not going to tell you what to think, right? We're a society of free thinkers here at the Murphy Monologues. So I'll let you make up your own mind. But yeah, it's very sad. And of course, we got a meme here, so I apologize to the audio folks who cannot see this lovely, hilarious meme. It's that still from the Barbie movie where, she stops to have the thoughts of death, and the music stops and all that. But it's got this caption. "You guys ever think about how liberal therapy culture prevents community action by turning mental health into a matter of the individual?" God, what a meme. What a meme, bro. And this is exactly what's going on, right? I mean, we shift it. It's not the system, right? It's not that horrible face punching system that we've got going on. It's that you have a problem in your brain. So, bro, here's some pills. Now shut the hell up and get back to work, right? Get back in the cubicle. I don't care how sad it makes you. Well, listen, we'll install the suicide nets. Fine. Can't keep losing workers. But yeah, I really don't think it's that radical, to repoliticize mental health. Not least because, you think about it, right? This is just our brains screaming at us that something is terribly wrong. Are our brains wrong? Or is this normal and fine and good? I don't know. Are you sad and anxious all the time for no reason? Or because most of your waking time on Earth is colonized by a soul-crushing job where you enrich others and refusal to participate means you'll end up homeless? I don't think people like saying the quiet part out loud, but that's what's going on here. You're going to go make someone else rich. You're going to like it. And if you don't, go live in the streets. It's messed up when you really think about it. Which is why I'm a big fan of, saying the quiet parts out loud. As we all should be. So depression should be seen as a sign that what you're doing is not working. Now, this is also some other recent information that's come out after the publication of Capitalist Realism that I think really highlights just how on the money Fisher was about this, right? I mean, the man hit the nail on the head. And I think a lot of research has validated exactly what he was saying in the book. So in Psychology Today, Alison Escalante, I'm sorry, I know I'm mispronouncing that. I'm very sorry. I'm just going to call her Allison. But Allison draws from new, as of 2020, research by the British Psychological Society to highlight our evolving perspective on depression. And the British Psychology Society is like the biggest psychological association over there. And they've got some pretty interesting things to say about depression. Quote, "We argue in this report that important aspects of our society have become depressogenic. In other words, they can lead to depression." So this comes right from like the very beginning of the report. I think it was like the abstract. I mean, they're literally like, yeah, we've created a society that straight up leads to depression. Not always, not in every single case. Or I'm sure you can find someone out there who thinks they're happy, but man, they're wrong. Yeah, send them this episode, man. Let's prove those bastards wrong. Let's make them as sad and miserable as we are. So Allison explains that our autonomic nervous system is constantly scanning for threats, right? When a threat is detected, we enter fight or flight mode. She writes, quote, "Sometimes the threat is so bad or goes on for so long that the nervous system decides there is no way to fight or flee. At that point, there is only one option left: immobilization." And, you know, it's kind of wild. So she explains immobilization by comparing it to how a rabbit's body shuts down after being caught by a fox, right? So essentially, immobilization causes feelings of disconnection, right? It dulls you to pain. It minimizes suffering because, like, yeah, you're about to die, and like, well, the least we can do is like let you not suffer horribly until you die. But is this not like literally our waking lives, right? Is the modern experience of wage labor so different from being a rabbit stuck in a fox's mouth right before he eats you? I don't think so, man. Capitalist realism is like a depression machine. And what's really sad about that is, Allison, who wrote this wonderful article. I do encourage you to check that out also. But she highlights that the best solution is social connection. But guess what, bro? We are living through a loneliness epidemic, at least here if you live in the States. So social connection is not really an option anymore, right? It's not that you don't want to have friends or family who care about you, but you just you can't, right? 5 years ago, you moved across the country for a job that paid twice your salary and you thought you were making the right move, but you weren't. And now you are alone and sad on the internet listening to dipshits like me talk about how we live in hell. Man, this is some crazy shit. Is it possible to live a decent life inside the fox's mouth? Is it possible to be happy and smile as the invisible fist punches you in the face? I'm not so sure, man. So what ends up happening, right? What happens when people are, teetering on this like depression, right? They can't fight the system, they can't flee the system, and they're just kind of shutting down, right? They're numbing themselves, they are addicted to substances and so on. What ends up happening is what Mark Fisher calls depressive hedonia. And he describes it like this, quote, "Depression is usually characterized as a state of anhedonia, but the condition I'm referring to is constituted not by an inability to get pleasure so much as it by an inability to do anything else except pursue pleasure. There is a sense that something is missing, but no appreciation that this mysterious missing enjoyment can only be accessed beyond the pleasure principle." So essentially, we've got a whole bunch of people who they don't have a lot of good things in there. They're not getting enough of the good brain chemicals, right? I'm not a neuroscientist or anything, but like the dopamines, the serotonins, all the good ones. So it's like they've got to go and just like basically collect the spare change, right? That's sitting on the filthy floor, right? Which is like what's going on with a lot of our technology these days, right? The depressive hedonia he described seems to present itself as having, some similarities with ADHD symptoms, right? And I've speculated on my own time that essentially, like, is there some kind of connection here, right? Why are people self-diagnosing with ADHD so much, right? People can't pay attention to anything. They're just, everything is just instant gratification, or increasingly so, right? We're not everything, right? It's a little bit of an overgeneralization, but we're definitely going in that direction, right? It's gradual. It's happened a lot faster in the last few years. I mean, look at how much short form video has exploded. I mean, good God, I've never seen a cultural explosion like anything like this in my entire life. And it's kind of horrifying because I don't think short form video is really all that good for you. And it's like we are now unable or unwilling to access deeper forms of enjoyment, right? Think about like reading a novel versus doom scrolling TikTok, right? Now I think most people would want to be the kind of person that reads a novel, right? Or, maybe even watches a movie, like, and actually looks at the movie screen as the movie's playing, right? That would be nice. But that's increasingly not what we do anymore. We're all looking at our phones, right? The phones have gotten so good at showing us things that give us that little bit of dopamine whenever we need it, and it's almost like, you're hooked up to like a dopamine machine, right? And you just, you pull out your phone, like, a little bit, that little dopamine, infinite scroll feed, blasted into your blood and your veins, and you're feeling fine now, man, feeling fine. And I think that is exactly what Fisher is talking about with depressive hedonia. I think that he would have a big problem with the way short form video and all that has just completely infiltrated and dominated culture now. But to bring this in maybe an unexpected direction, this is actually Friedrich Nietzsche's worst fear come true. So if you know anything about, Friedrich Nietzsche, he talked a lot of shit about how people should be living their lives, how everyone is basically like an NPC. He actually had a term for these people, what he calls the last man. Quote, "Alas, the time is coming when man will no longer give birth to a star. Alas, the time of the most despicable man is coming. He that is no longer able to despise himself. Behold, I show you the last man." So to Nietzsche, essentially what the last man represents is someone who is just mired in mediocrity and passive contentment. The kind of person that, like, let's be real, we all know someone who's just staring at their phone all the time, watching shit like TikTok and like kind of turning their brain off. And then you talk to them and it's like, it's almost like their brain is like a loop of just like a TikTok feed, right? And like, oh wow, it's kind of uncanny. It's kind of uncanny when you think about it. So I see a connection here. The chronically online TikTok doom scrollers, right? Are these Nietzsche's last man, right? The kind of people that, would just, and it's like, listen, I'm not criticizing, like, I do my own doom scrolling too. Like, I live in a glass house as well, so I can't talk that much shit. What's most interesting about this, I think, is it's not just impacting the pores, right? This is also impacting people who come from privilege and money and wealth and power. So there was a really wild article that got published in the Atlantic's 2024 issue. The title is "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books." And if you've not read this, again, I encourage you to go check that out. It should not be that hard to find because it is terrifying and is very popular because we love terrifying things because we're a messed up society. But they've got all these testimonials and these quotes from these professors talking about, and these are like people at Ivy League schools, right? These are like top tier, these are kids who came from a home with both parents. And that two parents that are sober and have jobs and like don't have a whole bunch of trauma and baggage. And you were raised and you weren't beaten as a kid or neglected. Like what? And still they're going to these Ivy League schools and they're still not able to read books. That's wild. That is wild, man. I don't think I can understate that enough. And I think it connects perfectly well with, Fisher's overarching point. And it's like you can just read the article and just smell the defeatism, right? Because clearly the professors, they actually care about this shit, right? Like, yeah, reading books is good and like people are better if they read books because reading books can make your brain grow, right? So there's one professor that they quoted who does American studies at Columbia. And you can just almost smell the defeat here. He says, quote, "One has to adjust to the times." So they're not really assigning long readings anymore. They're not assigning a whole bunch of novels for kids to read because they can't, right? They just literally cannot pay attention to a book. I mean, there was one professor who said their students struggled to read a 14-line poem without becoming distracted. Holy shit. 14-line poem? And again, these are not the fellow poors, right? These are kids with trust funds. And kids who, if they're falling behind in their classes, they get a damn tutor. And still, they can't pay attention to the shit. It's too boring. It's too boring. So are smartphones the cause? Are smartphones the reason that we have depressive hedonia? Maybe. But I also think there are some other factors worth mentioning here. I think one important part is that students are also spending more time than ever working jobs, right? College be expensive, you know what I'm saying? So if you're not working a job while you're in college, forget about ever paying that debt off. But they're also doing things like extracurriculars, right? You got to have a whole bunch of things that you do in addition to being a good student. Otherwise, you're just not top tier material like we thought you were. Sorry, bro. Get the hell out. But I think another important factor here is that, as a society, as a culture, I think the value placed in the humanities is lower than ever before. Lower, and it just keeps going. It's like, I know a lot of people who wanted to do something in the humanities, but they were like, yeah, I don't want to be a starving substitute teacher the rest of my life. So I went with something boring and profitable. And that's very sad, because we just don't value the humanities like we used to. We're cutting funding for it. We're stopping people from experimenting. And it's, increasingly we have a culture where we want everyone who does the humanities or, entertainment or culture, whatever we want to call this shit. We're turning them all into P.T. Barnums. People who are good at attracting a crowd, people who are good at, deceiving the crowd to take their money, right? Barnum, famously, put on the show of the mermaid, right? Look at the mermaid bones. Was it actually a mermaid? Of course it wasn't. Mermaids don't exist. He took fish bones and monkey bones and kind of stitched them together and just ran this grift, right? Because people, and it's like the people ate it up. Right? It's like, I don't blame them. People don't know any better. It's just kind of like a natural thing to be curious about this. And it's like, oh, I'll go look at the mermaid. And it's a grift, man. It's a grift. And if that's not the perfect analogy for the direction our culture is headed, I don't know what is. So there was a teacher and administrator, Mike. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that last name. I'm sorry, Mike. But he summed it up perfectly. Quote, "There's no testing skill that can be related to, can you sit down and read Tolstoy?" Right? So it's not good for your tests. It's not good for your grades. Doesn't actually help you in any obvious way. So why on earth would you put any effort in it? Forget about expanding your worldview. Forget about feeling things more deeply. Forget about adopting new perspectives on the world or life. Forget about that shit. Go make some money. Go make some money. So, yeah, that is depressive hedonia in a nutshell. Are you suffering from depressive hedonia? Is everyone? Are your loved ones? Are your rulers? Is your dog? Maybe not your dog yet. We don't have VR glasses for him yet. But what God, when we do, man, that it's all downhill. Even for the animals, we'll somehow mess up their brains. It's scary shit. Very scary shit. So, taken together, we cannot imagine a political alternative. Our culture is completely stagnant, unimaginative, and incapable of imagining the new, right? Even in these fictional stories. And worst of all, we're increasingly suffering from mental illness. We are so incredibly sad and messed up. And I think if you're the kind of person who's even a little tuned into the vibes, you know how bad things really are. You know how bad things really are. We live in a sad time. I don't think we can beat around the bush on that. And I don't know how we fix it. I really don't. And neither did Mark Fisher. You know, I mean, I liked his suggestion of let's repoliticize mental illness because our brains are screaming at us that this is a horrible nightmare. Has anything changed, though? I don't even know how we go about doing that. What do we do? How do we fix this shit? I mean, I'm not smart enough to be able to answer any of those questions. But one of you guys might be. So one of you guys might be. Please drop a comment. Let me know, right? How do we fix this shit? So, yeah, capitalism really does feel like the abyss. You stare into it, it stares back until you either lose your mind, your life, or both. And honestly, it's terrifying to be one of the people who actually sees it. Because what you find isn't the invisible hand of the free market. It's the invisible fist. And it just keeps punching your dreams, your spirit, your Wi-Fi bill. And worst of all, you can't punch back. Because somewhere along the way, we forgot how to imagine punching back. Whether you're a billionaire, a barista, or some existential dipshit yelling at a webcam in his grandma's basement, the abyss is watching, and the fist is swinging. And once you really understand that, man, it can break you. It's overwhelming. It's demoralizing. It's kind of hilarious, actually. Because at the very least, it gives us something to complain about. And if you're anything like me, complaining is basically like a spiritual practice. So make sure to follow the Murphy Monologues wherever you get your podcasts. Best case scenario is you follow the newsletter and you can, bam, have the episodes delivered right into your inbox. No middleman required. Oh, isn't that nice? Yeah, so maybe we can find some creative new ways to scream into the void together. At least we won't have to be alone. I know it's a lot. I know, but man, sometimes just talking about this shit makes you feel better. Realizing we don't have to do this alone. We don't have to be sole individuals fighting and trying to make change on our own. It's nice to think that we can do it together. So join me, my friend. Let's do something together. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.